All right, Calley Means, thank you so much for joining us. Health, such an enormous part of what's going on across the country, for good and for ill. I mean, in some ways, Americans have never been in worse health, and in other ways, Americans have never really been more conscious of kind of what's at stake. Lay it out for us real quick. You know, you're a guy who's been into the whole sort of like improving Americans' metabolism for a long time. Your sister's an MD, been working together on improving Americans' health. What was your on-ramp into this movement, and did you really expect that it would take off so fast?
3 on-ramps to the movement. 15 years ago, I was a good young conservative. I interned at the Heritage Foundation in the White House for George W. Bush and got into campaigns, inevitably did consulting for food and pharma. That's where everyone goes.
Yeah.
And the story I always talk about is I helped Coca-Cola shuttle money to the NAACP, and the NAACP said it was racist to take away food stamp funding for soda. Now 18% of food stamp funding goes to soda.
And counting.
And counting. So kind of, and then a lot on the pharma side, which is profiting from the fact that we're subsidizing soda for kids, and 38% of teens now have prediabetes. The second awakening was my sister, star of the family, Stanford Med School, all the credentials, left when she realized she didn't learn, and all this training, NIH as well, she didn't learn one time, one class, why people get sick. She is trained to be a mechanic, to profit from people being sick, to cut them open and prescribe pills. And then just had a typical experience. My mom gets stage 4 cancer, and the medical system says it's unlucky, but she was on 5 other pills. We're missing the warning signs right now. And am I surprised it's become a political movement? I think it's amazing, and we owe a great debt of gratitude to Bobby Kennedy and Donald Trump for bringing this to national conversation. But coming from my DC experience, and what I've been trying to offer to this in the past couple of years, is there was an underpriced political asset with this issue of making America healthy. It transcends politics. If you look at people around this hall, people in America, they are very frustrated with their kids being epidemically sick. We're dying at a much actually younger and younger rate right now. We live 10 years less than the Japanese or the Swiss. There's something really, really off happening. I think Bobby Kennedy captured that, getting 20% of the vote at one point. And then to me, and helping to foster that introduction, my theory has always been that Bobby Kennedy was the most MAGA person running aside from Trump, because MAGA is about taking on the corruption. American people, they want to be healthy, they want to thrive. Yep. But there's institutions, there's the swamp, there's corruption holding them back.
Yeah, the swamp doesn't stop at the Beltway's edge.
That's exactly right. And the biggest example of the swamp, in my opinion, the biggest example of the corporate cronyism and the corruption that threatens our country is the fact that the biggest part of our economy, the healthcare industry, demonstrably profits from a child being sicker for a longer period of time. That's the foundational issue that was talked about by President Trump and Bobby in this election. I think it's woken a lot of people up. It brought a lot of people to the Trump coalition. I think it's a great thing for the country.
You know, here's what I think the biggest deal is about all that. And, you know, there's a lot to choose from here. Major changes in the way that Americans are experiencing health and thinking about the swamp in the biggest way possible. When you roll it back to COVID and you roll it back to those lockdowns, you know, I was one of those guys who had those especially introverted friends on Twitter when it was still Twitter. And these are the guys who were doing the warnings about, you know, this thing is real, it's in China, it's coming our way. And meanwhile, you have, you know, the swamp creatures saying, no, you got to go to the wet market and you got to drink the bat soup, or else you personally are a racist. You got to get down there this weekend. And watching that transformation from a time when, you know, our guys in tech were like, we're going to make the vaccine, you know, we're going to pump people full of the juice, it's going to help them, it's going to save lives. Donald Trump, you know, like, we saved lives, it was amazing. And that was a much different world from the world that we're in now. And a lot of those tech guys, you know, they're not disavowing the vaccine or whatever, but what they are doing is they're saying, you know, the way that we can help save American lives now, the way that we can make America a stronger, more vital place where we can choose our own adventure, it's not by keeping people sort of plugged up to this machine.
What Bobby and Trump unpacked during the campaign, and by the way, I love that the tech guys are coming to Mar-a-Lago all the time. I think we're going to have a golden age of innovation. But yes, I agree. The one thing they don't quite see sometimes and have a blind spot on is that we're being poisoned. We're literally being poisoned. I talk about the food industry being consolidated by the cigarette industry in the 1990s. It was very deliberate. Literally, I don't know if you've heard this, but the 2 largest food companies in the 1990s were R.J. Reynolds and Philip Morris.
Right.
I mean, they took scientists to make our food addictive and have thousands of chemicals that they've co-opted the scientific agencies like the FDA and the USDA to let them in. I mean, our food is literally weaponized to be addictive. We're getting sick. And instead of letting that happen and then trying to out-hack that with a bunch of jabs and a bunch of pills, as a public policy matter, as a human capital matter, when 77% of Americans right now of military age are not able to join the military because of metabolic health, let's get to the root cause, which we can use a lot of innovation for. So that was really important. On President Trump and his transition, as you mentioned, kind of the COVID policies, I think there's something just extraordinary that's happened in the past month. He appointed Jay Bhattacharya to lead the NIH. Yeah. And this, to me, Bobby Kennedy is just an amazing pick, but if I were to pick my next favorite, Jay Bhattacharya is something everyone should be paying attention to. This person was blacklisted. He was shadow banned on Twitter for questioning lockdown policies, even potentially questioning some policies of that came out of Fauci and Trump. I mean, he was questioning that. He was doing science. He was right on some, wrong on others. But that's science. And what President Trump said with the Jay Bhattacharya pick is, we're going to look forward, but we're just going to get the facts. His instruction to Jay Bhattacharya is that he doesn't care. President Trump doesn't care about backwards. If the science leads to disputing a policy made before, let's change that policy. Let's figure out whether it's correct that the American Medical Association says that a 6-month-old should be getting the COVID jab 100% of the time. Right. Let's get science on that, and let's adjust that. Let's study the lockdown policies and future pandemic preparedness policies. I can't express this enough, and it's shocking to people on the left, but President Trump's directive is a golden age of science. I've never, in my meetings with the Trump administration and Bobby Kennedy, have seen one word of ideology, one word of getting to a solution that they want. They are instructing Jay Bhattacharya to scour the science, to empower great scientists to get to the truth. Yeah. And I think that's a great lesson from COVID. I think it's a great policy going forward. The science has become absolutely just a PR mechanism for industries that want us sick.
Yeah, so tell me what you think about this, because I think that this is kind of probably the biggest catalyst, in my opinion, of that change in mindset among the tech guys from Elon Musk on down. Is for years, we heard transhumanism good. We're gonna, you just plug yourself up to this technology, and you're gonna be able to transcend all of your human limitations. You're gonna be like a superhero. It's gonna be incredible. And we did start to get transhumanism, but it was not like this. Not taking my kid and Elon to the point where he says, like, my son is dead. Right. That transformation where they said, well, wait a minute, technology, it can enhance, it can improve, but when people start to think that it's going to be used to actually destroy our humanity, and it's not going to be your choice, it's going to be, we're going to take your children and turn them into something that they're not, whether or not you like it, that was just a sea change.
This is I think, there's so much societal dynamics that we're brewing right now. And I think one of the big issues with health and metabolic health is that a lot of the things that threaten us to an existential degree, are part of modern innovation. Yeah. Like, you look at actually artificial light. Right. It's actually like really disruptive.
To take a random example.
It's really disruptive to our hormone system. Yeah. If you put a chicken coop, if you have a light on in a chicken coop, they lay 2 times more eggs. It's like, that's just one input. Yeah. You look at then all the technology being on our phone all day, the food that we have, all this disruption to our circadian rhythm, our chronic stress. Again, these aren't necessarily good or bad things, but the incredible advances of modern society has led us to get, I think, detached from nature, detached from the awe and curiosity of our bodies. And in a weird way, the invisible hand of the incentives of these industries, from tech that wants our kids addicted on their phone all day, to food which wants kids addicted, to the pharmaceutical industry that wants kids on drugs. There's really, I think, an invisible hand that's really been against kids. Yeah. And I think the gender-affirming care insanity, where the American Medical Association, which still makes all the billing codes that underlie 20% of our economy, to this day say that a 2-year-old can get gender-affirming surgery. Right. 2-year-old, there's no age limit. Right. I mean, that's, I think you trace everything. It's driven by potential guilt, but also this economic incentive. There's millions and billions and hundreds of billions and trillions of dollars to be made from getting a kid sick, from getting them addicted, from keeping them in fear. So, I mean, I think this is something that the Trump administration, just in modern society today, we have to balance, because we do want to unleash responsible innovation, sure, but we have lost touch of common sense. And I think health has really said that. I don't think we're going to out-hack this chronic disease crisis we have. We also need to just get back to basics, and I think that's the message that Bobby Kennedy and Trump have really resonated on. It's like it's really a getting back to basics. message.
Yeah, and I think in that mix too is the spiritual stuff. Whether you're coming at it from sort of a more crunchy or hippie standpoint, or from a more traditional Christian standpoint. I've seen this, being in LA and traveling around the country. I've seen both flavors, and both of those flavors are present in the MAHA and the MAGA thing. Where people saying like, well, look, if you're spiritually unwell, and you're not attending to those needs, then how can you expect to be really physically well? How can you expect to be mentally well? And when I talk to Christian sort of critics of technology, and they're like, well, shouldn't we just throw all this stuff away? Isn't it just demons? Take it out to the trash. It's like, well, look, you got to start by taking out the trash in your heart, making this a place where God feels comfortable taking up residence. And if you're not doing that, then your approach to technology is going to be deranged. Your approach to trying to get through your day is going to be deranged. You're going to be looking to, whether it's food or whether it's drugs or whether it's technology, always trying to find a substitute or a shortcut away from that kind of harder spiritual practice, and I think that's definitely going to be in the mix going forward as technology does become more powerful, as drugs do become something that you can just reach for. Big pharma wants to just have that ready for you, wants to substitute for that spirituality in your life.
I've been talking about this a bit with my sister. She's much more eloquent on it, but if we were ever to write another book, it'd be around the fact that at the end of the day, it's much more than a health crisis. We have a spiritual crisis in this country. I mean, when you look at the root causes of why we're getting so sick, it's that we've lost respect for natural cycles. We've lost respect for the interconnectivity of our beautiful world and environment and the soil. We've lost respect for the role of a parent, particularly a mother, to nurture their children, to cook at home. It is, coming from like Stanford, Harvard Business School, women are driven into crazy anxiety if they have a kid and don't go straight back to work. It's considered totally less than to care for children.
Oh, the insane propaganda of like, your life is over. This is a zero-sum game. This is something inside you that's sucking your life force out. I mean, it's been terrible.
And of course, everyone should be able to make their own decisions and do whatever they want.
Of course.
But working at Amazon, making $100,000. To trading, and feeling guilty for not going straight back to work, which is what happens epidemically. There's issues we have to unpack there. The fact of the matter is, men and women are doing really bad right now. Yep. Women, 25% of them are on SSRI.
Yep.
All of these promises of a
and
great
can't get off,
society,
even if they want to.
Can't get off. It takes years to get off. If you're on it for 6 days, it takes a year to unwind it.
That's insane.
So there's something I think more core. At the end of the day, and what the point of our book is, and I think, I hopefully what's resonated, and I'm proud it's resonated with the conservative audience. I mean, I think these issues and these issues that might have been considered woo-woo or for a Berkeley seminar 5 years ago, I think they're resonating with conservatives because there's just a demonstrable human capital problem where we're just like destroying our children's future.
Sure.
There's also, I think, really a spiritual issue. There's something we're losing sight of as a society and really failing as a society when 50% of teens are overweight or obese. I mean, what in a complete and utter, for conservatives who believe in personal responsibility, it's not personal responsibility that there's an epidemic of obesity among 6-year-olds, right? Now the American Academy of Pediatrics is recommending Ozempic they're going down to 6. They're saying a 6-year-old who's obese. That's a spiritual problem.
Absolutely.
That we're poisoning our children so much. Parents aren't trying to do that, right? So really, and I think this came through in a way people can't fully even define. I think something spiritual did come through when Trump and Bobby talked about this issue. And you talked to a lot of women particularly, but other voters here. The gender gap closed for Trump, independents, young people, other demographic groups. I think it's hard to define, but they feel it was actually spiritual. In a weird way, I think Donald Trump could be our spiritual, help lead a spiritual revolution by focusing more on the root causes of health, which eventually gets to real societal dynamics of how we lost our way.
People want that kind of leadership. And, in America, it can be a little trickier because we don't do theocracy here. We got a First Amendment, and that's good. But it does mean that we have to put in a little extra work where it's not as simple as saying, all right, well, we're just going to smush the church and state together. It's going to be one thing, and everyone just follow that. It's a little more complicated for America. I think the payoff is good. Even if you go all the way back to the ancient Christian church, the model is harmony. It's not a strong state and a strong church becoming one. It's a healthy church and it's a healthy state. And when you have a leader in government who's able to kind of open up that aperture, I think people really welcome that. That spiritual thing that you're describing, it cuts across so many issues. It even goes, I think this is super important, to immigration. for decades,
Yes.
including in the Republican Party. There's been a strong, wealthy, well-connected constituency that says like, well, sure, legacy Americans, they're not doing so great. They don't have that personal responsibility. They're wasting their money on the lottery. They're eating the, they're eating the bad food. They're hurting themselves, watching too much TV. But it's okay because we're just going to bring in, new Americans, and those Americans are going to be hardworking.
Right.
Those Americans are going to be willing to hustle, and they're not going to be sort of fat, dumb, and happy. And what happened is, you bring those immigrants in, and then they just become subject to the same spiritual illness and the same patterns, destructive patterns of culture and public life that the Americans who are already here are. That isn't going to solve the problem, and that changes the way that we think about so many things.
That's such a good point. I mean, you mentioned we're not a theocracy. As conservatives, we don't want to top-down mandate, how people should act. I think this is another thing that we've really unpacked at the MAHA movement. We actually have a nanny state right now of trillions of dollars of incentives that are incentivizing people to be sick, that are incentivizing people to poison themselves, that actually have the USDA recommending added sugar for 2-year-olds, that have the USDA recommending an ultra-processed food diet, 91% in ultra-processed food being healthy for kids, and then trillions of dollars of incentives over the past 10 years towards this crap. That's just food. Then, of course, we have mass incentives coming through to jab kids, to pill them. 40% of teens are on a pharmaceutical right now. 65% of American adults have a chronic condition. There's 4.6 billion prescriptions written for Americans each year. So those are all based on trillions of dollars of incentives. So I think something that came through with the MAHA agenda is we don't want to actually tell people what drugs to take, what food to eat, or what their spirituality should be, but we want to stop incentivizing people to poison themselves and then drug themselves, which is what we do now.
Yeah.
If we can do that and actually just clinically, if we clinically look at the $4.5 trillion a year that we spend on healthcare and ask how can we steer that money to unleash human capital, to reverse disease, to contribute to American thriving, inevitably I think those things go to things that harden up our body and harden up our body's ability to actually experience nature and commune more with God, quite frankly.
Yeah.
I mean, you're going to get to more incentives for better food instead of foreign and Chinese-owned pharmaceutical companies, which we're sending currently hundreds of billions of dollars to. You're going to inevitably get to kids being outside in the sun. You're going to get to incentivizing more exercise. Right now in a school, kids get less time outside than a maximum security prison. You're just going to clinically, if you just follow the science on what can unleash human thriving, you should, and I don't think anybody would disagree with this, then you should follow that science and then incentivize what helps that. So I do think it's not mandating that everyone becomes more spiritual or mandating that anyone eats anything. We should have, I'm a libertarian. I think drugs should be legal. I think Coca-Cola should be legal. I think cigarettes should be legal. Make it all legal. We should not be recommending and subsidizing harmful things. We should be incentivizing and advising people to do good things. There's nothing ideologically wrong with that.
Well, and what it teaches is that we actually do have control, and the American people themselves have control over the trajectory of technological research and development.
Right.
For so long, that has belonged to such a small class, almost a caste of Americans who don't really think of themselves as Americans. They think of themselves as sort of, global citizens, or maybe they care more about their consciousness than they do about their humanity. And they've pushed technology in a very specific and pretty narrow, accelerated direction of development. And that's one choice. And we've got many other choices we can take. And for Americans just to see that, hey, we can actually all sort of share in this deliberative process as citizens, recognizing what the costs and benefits of these approaches are, and choose a direction of acceleration, a direction of advancement that's actually going to strengthen our form of government, strengthen our way of life, and ultimately strengthen our humanity instead of undermining it.
It's so simple, but when it comes to health, I really, I think there should be an emphasis to channeling technology to get back to basics. I mean, we're talking about all of these hacks to drug ourselves out of our sickness, but I mean, I actually think that, I don't even think Elon understands this. Have you seen his robots, these incredible robots?
Yeah.
So
Optimus.
You can actually use the Optimus. You can actually, I dream about those on farms. The biggest problem of why we have an industrial agriculture system where we have to use all the pesticides, it's not actually higher output. It's actually very low output compared to regenerative farming, but it's cheaper labor because you're able to line everything up. But then because everything's unnatural lined up, you need to spray all these pesticides. If you have a regenerative farm with a robot, I mean, it's just an idea, but you can actually use technology to get back to natural processes. That's how farming happened forever. So I would just, I think as we approach a new age of agriculture, a new age of innovation, what innovation looks like in science, you can actually, use it to get back to basics instead of out hacking these terrible things that have already happened. You got to get back to, basic principles.
I think that's absolutely right. And, I talk with guys sort of across the spectrum of the movement here. And, a lot of the criticisms are like this technology is dangerous because it can be so dehumanizing. Where they're going to replace us, they're going to, wipe out our humanity. They want to turn us into just sort of floating consciousness in the cloud. Yeah, that door is open. And whose choice is it to walk through that door? And how is that choice going to be influenced by what we look at right now? Dehumanization is already happening right now. You don't need a planetary cyborg taking over. You don't need Skynet taking over in order for there to be dehumanization. Just the things that you ticked off. What are we doing to our bodies? What are we doing to our food? What chemicals are we addicting ourselves to? What kind of relationship with our technology is putting us in this kind of passive, self-alienated state? All those kinds of things are dehumanization, and we have already seen the fruits of those kinds of patterns, that kind of culture, that kind of spiritual approach. And if you start chipping away at that kind of stuff, and you actually use the power of government not to dig people deeper into that hole that they're already in, but to kind of let some fresh air in and let them breathe, that experience alone, I think, is going to be enough to get people onto a page where they say, like, hey, humanization is happening, nature is healing. And when you start having that experience in a very short period of time, it can change your mindset and can break those kinds of habits.
I agree. I mean, again, these are actually pretty bold, big, complicated topics. And I just, the topics Casey and I have been thinking about. And I think what's beautiful about the MAHA movement, what kind of is happening with Trump and Kennedy, is it channeled some of these philosophical ideas, I think, into a cohesive political movement. I really believe that voters are grappling with these issues.
Yep.
And by channeling the anger around, what's happening to kids, by channeling this feeling of dehumanization, by channeling this feeling that we're on a conveyor belt where we're being poisoned and drugged, by channeling maybe some valid fears about technology. I mean, which is a big part of our health mix, honestly. It's not that we shouldn't have technology or innovation, we should,
right.
But it's understanding the costs and benefits. It's just head in the sand to say that the incredible, historic, unprecedented technological innovation doesn't have drawbacks. That's the entire point. It's good. We should continue progressing. But this incredible pace of innovation has led to an attack on our cells in every way. Again, food, sleep, chronic stress, circadian rhythm, everything. It's all kind of having drawbacks. And we should continue innovating, but we should be really aware when it comes to health, when it comes to the incentives of health, that we should be ameliorating and addressing these drawbacks of modern society that are attacking our cellular health and microbiome.
Yep.
I mean, that's really kind of this theory that's coming together, and it's innovation with an understanding and an emphasis from our medical system of protecting our cellular health. Because what's happening today, an average human, we're just completely, the pace of change of all of our inputs is just we haven't been able to catch up. It's been 100 years and just so much has happened.
Yep.
And that's kind of the core of what my sister and I are talking. It's like we have to just at least, it's not good or bad, we just have to address it. We have to be aware of it.
Yeah, I think people are grappling with it, and one of the ways in which it is hard for people is, I think there's a widespread feeling of guilt and complicity, of like, I got taken for a ride, and I was sort of tempted by these big institutions that didn't have my best interest at heart, didn't have my kids' best interest at heart, and I sort of allowed myself to believe. I allowed myself to believe the propaganda. I allowed myself to think like, well, it'll just be easier if I just max the vax for my kid or whatever it is, give them the junk food, just prop up the iPad so that I can have a peaceful dinner or whatever, and people are it does bite that feeling of like, wait a minute, are we the baddies, And in a culture that for generations has been like, guilt is ridiculous. We're over that now. If you can dream it, you can do it. Follow your passions. Indulge yourself. Make sure that you have me time. All that sort of self-esteem programming. That really set people up for failure in a major way in encountering this kind of technological innovation, where they come at it with this sort of guilt-free, responsibility-free mindset. Of course, it's not going to end well. And so I think a lot of Americans, and it is going to take some. It's going to take some forgiveness. It's going to take some grace, and it's going to take some openness and honesty about saying like, hey, we're not perfect, and we are apt to make mistakes, and we do need to sort of relearn, kind of culturally and personally in our lives, how to how to be adult enough and mature enough to not lie to ourselves about what's at stake when it comes to our relationships and our children and all the rest.
I think you mentioned one important concept I've been thinking about, which is forgiveness.
Yeah.
I think the reality is that we're existing in an extremely suboptimal system right now where leaders in these institutions that we've been told to trust have made terrible, horrible mistakes. Yeah. When you go to what our kids are eating and what our dietary guidelines are, then to the pharmaceutical standards, which are clearly not working. There's never been a chronic disease pharmaceutical that's ever lowered rates of the chronic diseases actually trying to treat. Even Ozempic, they're projecting more obesity. I mean, Bobby Kennedy obviously has talked about the vaccine schedule. It's absolutely criminal to me that you can't even ask a question. That it's not even the argument itself. It's the fact that we're even asking a question is being attacked by the scientific authorities, which is to me a just total attack on science. Yeah. We should be able to ask questions about every important input that we're putting into our child's body, and especially if it's important, especially if it's consequential, especially if it's a good thing, we should be continuously subjecting that to science. What I think we need to do on all fronts is we need a mass unwinding and a mass reconciliation of terrible guidance on many different fronts that experts have given us. You can literally take any institution, the military, education, pharmaceutical products, food, just housing. I mean, it's like everything. Everything has been totally co-opted and is probably exactly wrong. I've talked to people in the food and pharmaceutical industry. They don't disagree it's is it good that the U.S. food companies make demonstrably less healthy food and when they send the exact same product with better ingredients to other countries? Is that good? No. Is it good that we can't even export our food to Europe because there's so many toxins in them? No. Do you actually think the fact that we're 4% of the world population and 75% of worldwide pharmaceutical profits is getting us a good ROI for the farm? No. It's nobody actually disagrees with this, but they're worried about liability and they're worried about actually just the disintegration of trust in institutions. I think,
it's already gone, baby.
Yeah, I think it's already happened, and I think we do need to create a process where criminal behavior should be dealt with. Yeah. But we need some grace, and I think to some degree understand that this has been a multi-front hand-holding of getting into a terrible system on a lot of this stuff. Yeah. And frankly, kind of not look backwards, but look forwards and fix this system because nobody agrees that this is working. I believe it's existential with what's happening to our children's health. So we need a mass come to Jesus moment with our institutional leads.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about basically a truth and reconciliation commission, and obviously apartheid is bad, but what's going on right now is with any race, any identity, any group is affected by this. It's happening to everyone.
Just as a thought experiment. Yeah. Imagine if it was true that one of the vaccines that was recommended and basically forced on every single living human American did turn out to show data that it was really wrong.
Right.
What would that imagine how many careers and how many lives and how much there's whatever you think of it, there's huge institutional aversion to even asking that question, which we're seeing. But we should be asking the hardest questions. It's the same thing with food and the dietary guidelines and what we've recommended with ultra-processed food and seed oils. I mean, what if you actually turns out that seed oils really are a very harmful ingredient? That's the top source of American calories right now.
Oh yeah.
We've been told they were heart healthy and safe. Mm-hmm. The institutional force to protect these bad decisions is unrelenting and breathtaking. So we need to unpack that.
Yeah, we do. And look, it's important to fix the laws, but laws alone are not enough to get us out of this. And so that, I think that all by itself is the reason why really shot selection is so important right now. Which policy tweaks matter the most? How do you start cutting into this beast?
How do you start doing it?
Yeah.
I think you do it very quickly. So here's kind of my 4-year MAHA vision. Let's work backwards. In 2028, we want both sides of the aisle fighting on a MAHA framework. We want both sides of the aisle talking like this. We want both sides of the aisle talking about healthcare, and the goal of healthcare is to reverse chronic disease. And this is very important. The Republican platform said the goal of healthcare is chronic disease reversal and prevention. That's never been said. Yeah. That's not the goal. It's chronic disease management is 95% of the healthcare system. Right. So you've actually opened up this new door. You already have the Biden FDA trying to ban food dyes before Trump gets in. Yep. You've got the Biden FDA going after other food-related safety issues. Who would have ever thought that, right? So from my perspective on wanting America to be healthier, I actually think if MAHA is successful, if it's just high-level successful in changing consciousness to a new political paradigm, where basically the Overton window is how do we make Americans healthier, which actually is a profound change in 2028, how do we do that? We need to just get unrelenting wins, low-hanging fruit, for Bobby and Trump. There's so much to do. To be honest, I'm agnostic on where to do it. I just want wins, wins, wins. So let's talk about some of the wins that President Trump and Bobby have talked about that can get this momentum. Number one, transparency, mass transparency. We do not have access into FDA studies that underlie our drug approval process. We don't have access to studies on pharmaceuticals. The NIH, which we're paying $50 billion a year for, we don't have access to those data sets. All the research that we're conducting, all these debates we're having, it's because we don't even have access to the research. We should be open sourcing, API, everyone can research it themselves, everyone can do the data analysis themselves, everything we currently have, and we should steer going forward, all academic research to be totally academic freedom, to be root cause, understanding why we're sick, and we're going to prioritize the most fearless and most taboo questions possible that people don't want to ask currently. We want people to ask those going forward. So just a revolution in science of transparent data, that gets to policy. If we have unimpeachable data from the NIH showing that glyphosate is harmful, or that atrazine, which is this chemical that's banned in every other country, that Alex Jones was right on, which does actually change gender of frogs that drink it in the water. If we have unimpeachable evidence, not just new research, but actually just reviewing what's been done in other countries.
It's going to surface an agenda.
That then impacts policy. So resetting science at the NIH is very important. The FDA, mass deregulation, actually. It's deregulation. I think we talked about it. It costs $2 billion to get a drug through. Big Pharma has strangleholded the regulatory process to not have any type of innovative. There's no allowance of innovative blood testing or innovative therapeutics or even preventative screenings. The Pronovo screens and blood testing and functional medicine type stuff, it's not approved by FDA. It costs $2 billion to get through that. I think by last count it costs $5 billion to get kind of new blood biomarkers through, as a thing. So it's just like
so much regulation is just a costly game that is designed to narrow the
protect sick care. The FDA to this day provides against preventative cancer screenings. So it's actually unleashing some more competition and deregulation in the FDA, getting conflicts out of the FDA, which is 75% funded by pharma for their drug approval department. And then also having the FDA really do a hard look at the food chemicals, which we have 10,000 chemicals that have been self-policed, self-waived into our process. The FDA said last week they don't know all the food chemicals in our food because the industry could just put them right in. It's totally fair, not ideological, to do post-market review of the 10,000 chemicals in our food that are banned in every other country. Before any policy, let's just figure out what's going on there and take action on the ones that are poisoning us. And then CMS, this is what I love about Elon and Vivek. We're talking about this continuing resolution bill, these boring things. They're now tweeting about CMS. It's the biggest department in government. This is Medicare, Medicaid services. 1.5 times more money flows through that than the whole defense and intelligence budget. This drives 20% of our economy. Let's get the codes unbundled from the American Medical Association, which is a pharma lobbying group. We outsource our economy, our 20% of our economy, all health billing, to a pharma lobbying group that, again, literally suggests gender transition surgery for 2-year-olds. That's not a joke. It's like, let's untangle our standard of care. And, if the standard of care from the AMA Medicare codes was that if a kid was depressed, instead of getting an SSRI right away, incentivize more movement for them, better food, getting out in the sun, you could incentivize that, we'd have a different world.
Absolutely.
You could actually incentivize those things. So it's benefit flexibility on the CMS codes. So those are some of the key principles that are being talked about. And I think you can we're building a list of just 50 ideas you can just start punching out to achieve those principles and get wins.
It really shows how management brain can infect everything.
Right.
If your idea of government, if your idea of political life is not citizenship driven, it's management driven, then pretty soon you're looking at health, and how do you look at it? Well, it's about managing illness.
It's called
the more you want to manage the more you want to manage the thing that's supposedly bad, the more you're incentivized to see that thing everywhere and to find that thing everywhere, and ultimately to create that bad thing everywhere so that you can just keep on managing it.
One of the most shocking things the past month has been that the industry, the pharma and such, come in and they don't argue that what they're doing is right.
Yeah.
They argue that it's going to hurt the economy to change.
Right.
They actually acknowledge the point that they're profiting from kids being sick. They don't dispute it.
It's just going to be more costly.
It's going to hurt jobs.
Right?
No, they actually say it's going to be less costly. But that because we're going to spend less on healthcare, given what Bobby Kennedy is saying, it's going to cost them.
Yeah.
It's going to cost them their growth and cost them their profits by making people healthier. No, making people healthier is a government efficiency solution. We're going bankrupt as a country right now because we're getting so sick. So it's absolutely true, that if we get Americans healthier, those are lost patients for the sick care system.
Yep.
So they actually argue that flat out, directly. They say if more Americans are healthy, we're going to lose out on money.
Because they're lifelong patients, basically. You get them from even before they're born all the way through death. Yeah. Man, but you seem optimistic.
I am.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of darkness here. I mean, I think this is an existential issue. I think it goes to what we're talking about. I think I think the reason we're arguably at the greatest period of progress and optimism for America, but also everyone is depressed and sick and anxious to a large degree, to a historically high degree, is because we do have so much opportunity, but we also have existential threats. That's my framework on it. And I think we have more ability to destroy ourselves and also more opportunity. Absolutely. And I think the two ways that came through in this election, why I thought it was the most important election of my lifetime, is I think we're closer on the big two existential threats than we've been in my lifetime, which is nuclear war and a health collapse. I do think we're on the verge of a food, agriculture, and health collapse, potentially. And, I think that is very heavy. I'm extremely optimistic. The other great part about America is that an independent media system is burgeoning. People talked about this. Ron Johnson invited my friends and me to the Senate, where we eviscerated the Senate itself for being corrupt, and senators stood up and clapped.
Wow.
I mean, this is a great country, and this is part of the process. So the fact that Donald Trump has channeled these issues and is talking about getting poisons out of our food, is talking about regenerative agriculture, is talking about making America healthy, talking about making his legacy item, getting kids healthier, that's awesome. And it's very optimistic, and he's got great picks.
Yeah, it is awesome. And the crazy thing about Donald Trump is I think it really does matter that this is a guy who's been around in America and has been a public figure for long enough that when people think back, and people still remember. And yeah, we got young guys who don't remember, they've only been around for a relative blink, but there's still a lot of Americans who are hitting their prime right now, who do remember the 80s and the 90s. It wasn't paradise. A lot of these problems were being sown, but in hindsight, you can look back and you say, like, there is a way that we can get back.
Absolutely.
And America's fall from the peak, Cold War was over, sole superpower, infinite money, economy is going nuts, everyone wants to come be in America, and the spectacular decline from that height did happen so quickly. You can't blame it all on the terrorists, you can't blame it all on Russia and China. We know that there's deeper stuff going on, and we remember, that in our lifetimes, we weren't in this predicament.
100%.
And to look at a guy like Donald Trump and say, like, and he saw it all too. He saw it all go down, and that continuity of memory, of collective memory, that has spiritual power, and it leads directly, I think, to the ability to actually stand up and make those changes you're describing.
Yeah, just from my small vantage point, seeing inside the transition, we are on the verge of more activity and vigor from our government than at any point, maybe in American history, at least since the New Deal. There are so many people. I mean, it's inspiring to me seeing Elon there, Mark Andreessen, like people from every industry, like the billionaires. But that's just not one measure. But like you've got like former Democrats just crowding. They're living there. Just take Elon. The fact that he's just living there and trying to help, and people from every single industry are trying to. I mean, you do have an assemblage of very smart voices. Diverse voices, voices that aren't necessarily right on everything.
Right.
But Trump's brewing that. He's having people disagree. And everyone's all hands on deck right now, giving ideas. The framework for the ideas that are all going through Trump is how do we drive bold change? It's shockingly non-ideological. It really is an administration and was a campaign about getting to root cause issues, getting the military industrial complex handled, getting this crazy border thing handled, getting health handled, getting our economy in a pro-growth mode. It's actually about big concepts, and that's the type of directive coming down that I'm seeing from Trump. It's just like, how do we go big here? How do we make big systemic legacy-making change? So I think you're going to see a flurry of activity come Inauguration Day.
I think it's really a moment of a refounding. You go back to the founding era. Those guys did not agree on everything. They had some vehement disagreements, but they agreed on the basics and they understood the moment that they were living in. And I agree. That's what's going on right now. Calley, thank you so much for joining us.
You.
God bless you and good luck.
God bless you. Thank you.
All right.